Today we'll be continuing our discussion of the obligation to have a mechitzah in Shul. More specifically, how high does a mechitzah have to be? What's the halacha of a balcony, a glass mechitzah, and that whole discussion. Before we begin, as always, this should not be relied upon for halachic rulings, and the posik should be consulted. So last time we explained that the obligation to have a mechitzah in Shul is learned out from the balcony that was created in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, during the Simchas Beis Shoeva, originally the men were at the outside and the women were in the inside. But the Gemara said that it boim lidei kalas rosh, it led to bad things. So they instituted that women should be in a balcony. So the Chassam Sofer, another poskim, said that the obligation to have a mechitzah in Shul is learned out from the mechitzah that was created in the Beis HaMikdash. So obviously, if you want to find out what type of mechitzah is necessary, we have to look at the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos and the Taisus Yomtiv on Mishnah in Sukkah both write that the balcony in the Beis HaMikdash was created in a way so that the women can see the men, but the men cannot see the women. It's clear from the writings of the Taisus Yomtiv and the Rambam that way, even though in Sefer Yad HaChazaka it's not as clear, but in Mishnayos it's pretty clear that the way they built the Beis HaMikdash, the mechitzah, the balcony of the Beis HaMikdash, was in a way so that the men would not be able to see the women. So the Samer Rebbe, in a very, very lengthy tshuva in Taras Yom Tov Chelik Vav, explains that if that's the type of mechitzah that was created in the Beis HaMikdash, so too in every shul there is a need for the mechitzah to be in a way that the men and women cannot see each other. Because that's always a very old question of how high does a mechitzah have to be. So the Chassam Sofer says, he explains, based on the Rambam, Taisus Yomtiv, that the Taisus Yomtiv writes, Pirush Rambam Kadesh Yistaklu Hanashim B'Nashim, that the balcony was created in the Beis HaMikdash so that men and women don't see each other. V'adinimai ki asmeichem shalmata hayu arayim b'simcha lo hasmeicha ba'atzmam. And the Taisus Yomtiv says it's 100% true because the men in the bottom, the ones dancing, the Taisus Yomtiv says they were big tzaddikim, so maybe we were not choshesh that they would see the women, but the other men that came to view the Simchas Beis Shoeva, there should be an issue of them looking at women, and therefore it was created in a way that they can't see each other. The Rambam in Pirush HaMishnah seems to indicate that it was built in a way that the windows that the women could watch the men was thinner on the outside, was thinner on the inside and thicker on the outside, meaning that it narrowed, so the women can see. They had a larger view of the men, but the men could not see the women. That's what it seems from the Rambam and from Taisus Yomtiv. And we mentioned last time that there was a psak din printed, signed by over 70 rabbanim, including the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Divrei Chaim of Sanz, in the Sefer Leva Ivri, that it says the following: Asur lasis mechitzah hamavdelas bein ezras nashim ve'anashim rak ba'ofen asher lo yuchlu lehistakel anashim b'nashim. That these rabbanim signed the letter when they were describing the height of a mechitzah. They said it has to be in a way that they don't see each other. And this is obviously based on the explanation that we just saw. And also the Sefer Meshech Dvarim writes the same thing, that it has to be that the men and women can't see each other. The Tzitz Eliezer and Chelek Chaf Siman Zayin also quotes the Rambam, and therefore he says, "Ubenegei kama shetzarach liyizgoiv mechitzah." When it comes to how high a mechitzah must be in Shul, Lafia Amar tzarach shetigoiva kegoiva ish ke'erech berach k'sholosh ames v'chetzi. It has to be so that the average man cannot see the average woman. So he says that would be around 3.5 amos, which is like 7 feet. The average person is under 7 feet, and therefore that would be enough. But again, they're all under the same premise, the same assumption, that the mechitzah has to be in a way that the men and women can't see each other. Similar ruling was expressed by the Mishnah Halachas and Chelik Zayin Siman Beis. The Tshuva Shevet Alevi, or Shmuel Vosner, Chelik Aleph Siman Chaf Tes, was asked about having a glass mechitzah. So he pretty much says that won't work, because based on what we're saying till now, I was at a shul where the mechitzah was made of glass. According to what we're saying right now, the whole purpose of a mechitzah is that the men and women don't see each other. A glass mechitzah would not accomplish anything. And Rav Moshe Stern, in Shuvas Ber Moshe, describes the obligation to have a mechitzah, and he says that it has to be in a way that men and women don't see each other. And any person disagrees with this is just trying to uproot the Torah. So I don't think he meant to connotate that Ramosha Feinstein was doing so, but there was a posek who disagreed with this whole rationale, and that was Ramosha Feinstein. Ramosha Feinstein Zatzal, in many tshuvas, in Igros Moshe Arachaim Chiluk Aleph Siman Lemetes to Mem Daled, describes at length that he feels that the purpose of a mechitzah is not to stop men and women from seeing each other. Because Ramosha Feinstein says, what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said originally there was no balcony. Originally the men were in the inside and the women were in the outside. And they felt that that would suffice. And then the Gemara says, it led to promiscuity, it led to inappropriateness, and therefore they had to build a mechitzah. So says Moshe Feinstein, if the major thing that's required to separate the men and women is that they don't see each other, then what were they thinking originally? That the men were the outside, the women were in the inside, that's going to help? How is that going to help? They're looking at it, they can see each other. There's no door there, there's no mechitzah there. How could they have even conceived for a second that would help? Therefore, explains Moshe Feinstein, the purpose of the mechitzah is not that the men and women don't see each other. It's rather that it shouldn't come to kalas roish or sicha negia. We don't want men and women to be mingling, to be talking, to be touching each other. That's the purpose of mechitzah. We don't create a mechitzah so that men and women don't see each other. Why? Because explains Moshe Feinstein, this is just a very important halacha to know, and that is, if a woman is not dressed properly, a man is not allowed to see her. That's clear. But if a woman is dressed completely properly, and she comes into, let's say, your house, and the only thing that she's revealing is her hands and her face, then the only issue would be if a man looks at her with the inappropriate intentions. It's called mechaben lahanes. The Gemara says, that if you stare at a finger of a woman but with the wrong intentions, it's an avera. So says Moshe Feinstein, if a woman is dressed properly, then the only thing you'd have to conceivably be concerned about is for a person to look at her with inappropriate intentions. Says Moshe, we don't have to be concerned for that. As long as you cover most of her body, meaning as long as she comes into shul properly, then there's no concern of looking at each other. The concern would only be talking and having physical contact. And therefore Moshe Feinstein writes that the height of a mechitzah is 58 or 60 inches. In different shuvas he describes different opinions, either 58 or 60, it depends on the height of the average person. Just to explain his opinion, Moshe Feinstein feels that the mechitzah does not have to be in a way that you don't see each other. The mechitzah has to be in a way that it will make it very difficult for people to interact with each other. So therefore Moshe Feinstein says if the mechitzah is up to 58 inches, which is up to the average shoulder of a person, then there's no concern of you talking or intermingling or touching each other, because it's unpleasant. And in addition, there's no concern of seeing each other because you've covered most of the entire body is covered. The fact that the face and maybe the hair is uncovered, Moshe Feinstein said, is not a problem, because we're not concerned that someone's going to stare at our face in an inappropriate contention. That's obviously not a concern that we have to make. And the fact that the woman's hair is uncovered and she might be married, we discussed in a previous halacha, there is the opinion of the Aruch HaShulchan that says that nowadays you may daven in the presence of a woman whose hair is uncovered, even if she's married. So therefore Moshe Feinstein says the height of a mechitzah does not have to be in a way that you don't see each other. The purpose of a mechitzah is to stop talking. Now this has many halachic ramifications. First of all, how high does the mechitzah have to be? According to Ramosha, it does not have to cover the head of the woman, it just has to go up to her neck. But in addition, a balcony is a perfect example. If you have a balcony in a shul, even if you could see the women, it'll still be considered a mechitzah, because you can't intermingle and talk and touch each other with such a great chiluk between the two, and therefore it won't be a problem. Now Ramosha does mention, and a glass mechitzah would also likewise be under this shaila, because if you have a glass mechitzah, according to Ramosha Feinstein, it's considered a mechitzah, because at the end of the day, even though you could see them, that's not the point, that's not the purpose of a mechitzah. Now Ramosha does comment that if you have a glass mechitzah, or if you have a balcony, and the men can see the women, so even though it'll work as a mechitzah, but if the women aren't dressed properly, then obviously it's a problem. And therefore, when it comes to glass, it might work as a mechitzah, it might be a kosher mechitzah, and therefore you'd be allowed to daven there. It's not like what we spoke about last time, a shul that doesn't have a mechitzah, you may not be allowed to daven in such a shul. It has a mechitzah, but you may not be allowed to daven in that direction, because if a woman's not dressed properly, you may not be allowed to daven in front of her. So therefore, and even a balcony, it may work as a mechitzah, but if I could see the women, it may be a halachic issue. So Rav Moshe Feinstein says, even with a balcony, you should have a vilon, which is like a little like a cloth hanging down to cover the sight from the women. But that's the fundamental difference between Rav Moshe and the other poskim. The other poskim feel that the purpose of mechitzah is to not see each other. Rav Moshe says the purpose of a mechitzah, it's good for them not to see each other, but the purpose, the chiyuv of a mechitzah, is in order to prevent talking and inappropriateness and touching. There is a third opinion that some people say that 10 tefachim is enough, about 30 inches, because in some halachas, 10 tefachim is considered a mechitzah. I have yet to see any rationale for such opinion. Rav Moshe Feinstein himself addresses this, and he says this is absolutely inappropriate. It is not a mechitzah, and therefore I don't know of such a reason why you could rely on this. In my opinion, Rav Moshe Feinstein is the most lenient opinion, even though he was accepted, obviously, in America and in most of Klal Yisrael. But to go anything less than the shoulders, I don't believe would be a kosher mechitzah. Again, a Rav should be consulted. All questions could be sent to avizakatinsky@gmail.com, avizakutinsky@gmail.com.